Hi, everyone. I'm James. In addition to research, I lead a new area at Google called Technology and Society. These capabilities are not just something for the IT department to think about, but these are central to the business strategy of the company. Don't worry about, do people have the right skills to work alongside machines? Are we helping people train and build new skills to adapt to this new workforce? The question of how do we make sure everybody benefits from these technologies is one that I think you should be asking, and we should all be asking ourselves.
So, hello again. I'm still David Ignatius, Foreign Affairs columnist. Very pleased to be joined by James Manyika, who is the Senior Vice President of Research, Labs, Technology, and Society, quite a basket at Google. And for 25 years before that was a leading consultant at McKinsey. So he knows the world of business and AI both. Let's start by talking about Google and AI. It's often written that several years ago, Google was on the more cautious side in terms of companies that were experimenting with AI. It had this immense legacy business in research. It's now seen as a company that's very aggressive. And I want to just ask you to speak about Google's embrace of AI and its strategy in this part of its business going forward.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, David. It's actually been an extraordinary journey. I remember my first interaction with Google was actually in 2001, when the founders actually wanted me to join and come work on AI, because I'd done my PhD in AI robotics. So Google has been thinking about AI for a very long time. In fact, if you look at most of the technical breakthroughs in AI, whether it's the transformer architecture, which is the foundation for large language models, diffusion algorithms, and a lot of these basic core scientific innovations, they mostly have come out of Google. And I think the transformer, which was invented in 2017, was a core part of much of what we're seeing today. And I think it is the case that there was the approach at Google was to think deeply about when is it appropriate and when is the technology ready to deploy. So I think what you're seeing now is something we talk a lot about is we're trying to be two things at the same time. We're trying to be bold on one hand, but also responsible on the other hand. And I think for us, these are not conflicting goals. We think both matter. And I should probably say when we say bold, I don't think we don't mean be reckless. We don't mean rush and break things. We just mean be as ambitious as possible about what this technology can do and where it can make extraordinary impacts and differences, which for us, I'm sure we'll talk about this, we think about the impact for people, we think about the impact for the economy, we think about advancing science, we think about tackling massive societal challenges, and we think we're doing all of that. So that's what we mean by being bold. And of course, it's important to be responsible because this is a new technology. There's lots of complexities and challenges that we're going to need to work through. So I think both things are true.
Let me ask you a question that through our conversations this afternoon I keep thinking about, which is how fast this is going to happen. The headlines speak about overwhelming investment and transformational technology, and yet there's some studies that suggest that companies are slowing their rate of adoption of AI, that there may have been a little bit of hype as to how soon AI tools would actually be useful for companies. What's your sense? You've got a unique viewpoint. What's your sense of how fast this is moving?
Well, I think you have to be clear about what this is. I think the technological developments are moving at a breakneck speed. So the advances, we release models every few weeks now. So if you're just looking at the technical advances and innovations, it's breathtaking speed. But at the same time, we know that the adoption and productive use of these technologies in the economy takes a little bit longer. It's a bit like the old Solow paradox, where you remember Bob Solow said, you see computers everywhere except in the productivity statistics. And it was only when you had wide-scale diffusion and the transformation of business processes and activities that you started to see that show up in the productivity statistics. I think that's going to go not as fast as I think the technology will go. So I think that's a little bit of what you're seeing now. So yeah, sure, I'm sure most people in companies have tried and played with these tools. But if you look at where are we actually seeing scale deployments, and we're seeing that being applied to productivity enhancing activities and tasks at companies, I think that's a little uneven right now, and I think it's going to take time.
So as I mentioned at the outset, society and impact on society is part of your portfolio. You have spoken about how AI will create jobs and cut jobs, both. I want to ask you to speak about the job disruption phenomenon that AI will mean. Earlier today, we had the managing director of the IMF speak of an AI tsunami that's going to sweep across the global economy. I want to ask what your perspective is.
Yeah, I think thinking through the AI and kind of work and labor markets implications is actually one of the most important things. Look, research that I've done in the past, but also echoed and other economists have done this work. If you look at most of the economic research on this, it basically says three things will happen. And what tends to be the debate is the magnitude of those three things. So those three things are, first, we will likely see some job declines. For example, in occupations where a lot of the constitutive tasks that make up that occupation are easily done by machines. So there will be some job declines. Estimates for that range from 5%, sometimes higher than that, but that's one phenomenon we will see. The second phenomenon we'll see is actually job growth. And I think the job growth will come from a combination of existing jobs seeing more demand, but also new jobs. I think we forget that, if you go back to 1945 and compared to now, 85% of the jobs that have been created in the US economy since 1945 did not exist before in terms of the kinds of jobs that they are. In fact, if you go recently to 1980, that number is more like 60% of the job growth. This is work by Daron Acemoglu and others, Nobel economists. So this idea of job growth will be part of the picture. But the biggest phenomenon is the third thing, which is the jobs that will change. This is when this technology is kind of assistive to existing and augments existing jobs. By most counts, certainly in the research that I've been involved in, something that's probably going to be 2/3 of what we will see in the next couple of decades. If you don't like my numbers, recently the International Labour Organization put out a study where they looked at something like, I think it was something like 140 countries. And what they concluded is that the assistive augmentative effect was going to be 6 times the displacement effect. So, but even with all these three things happening, there's a lot we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to deal with some of the labor market transitions, some of the skilling challenges, to make sure that even as people transition occupations or their jobs change, they have the skills to be able to cope and manage through those transitions. And that's a lot of work that all of us are going to have to focus on.
Your colleague in the business, Dario Amodei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, has spoken about an AI bloodbath in the white-collar job market, even in the world of computer science and coding. I'm sure you've read his comments. Do you think that's overstated, and how would you describe the specific impact in these areas?
I think it's overstated. I think that, as I mentioned at the start, I think it's one thing to think about the pace of the technology. It's quite another to think about the pace at which it gets deployed and adopted in the economy at a pace that starts to actually change jobs. So my expectation is that that change will actually happen, but much, much more slowly. And we'll see that change happen in the 3 ways I just described. So, of course, it is the case that if some occupations, maybe even some sectors, will see more significant job declines, and others will see more significant job growth. But the aggregate picture will look like the biggest phenomena will be these assistive, augmentative uses of this technology.
So Google's in the business of hiring talent, the smartest people in the world, I'm sure. President Trump just announced a change in the way that so-called H-1B visas for highly talented people will be awarded. And the price of those visas is said to go up prospectively for new applicants to $100,000 per visa. I'm just curious whether Google has made inquiries about how this is going to work. And as you look at your business, what impact do you think it will have?
Well, our understanding is that this is going to apply to prospective applicants. So not existing employees who already have visas, but rather the ones in the future. And I think, so that's our understanding. Obviously, we're trying to make sure we stay connected with our employees, that they fully understand that. I also think that it's actually quite important, by the way, to continue to invest in American U.S. talent, even as we do that. But it's no secret for us that we think the U.S. and companies like ours having access to the best talent from wherever they are is a competitive issue that we care deeply about. So we think both things can be true, that we can invest in talent here, of which we should, and we do a lot of that. In fact, most of our employees come that way to us. But also having access to the best talent in the world, I think is important competitively.
But do you think this will have a disruptive impact on Google? And can you imagine a point at which you'd really have to move some of your operations offshore because of the difficulty of getting the people you want to hire into the U.S.?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think even today, the people on H-1B visas for us is a small proportion of our talent pool. So, of course, if you're one of those people who's trying to apply for a job at Google and you're counting on an H-1B visa, of course, you're probably quite concerned. But for us as a company, I think we'll work our way through this. But I think the access to talent is super important for us, whether it's here or wherever the talent is going to come from.
So I want to ask you to think about the kind of macro impact of AI on the global economy. A McKinsey Global Institute study, maybe you had something to do with it.
Well, I used to direct McKinsey Global Institute years ago.
So, but this was a 2023 study, projected that the impact of AI could be an addition of $4 trillion annually to the global economy. It's an enormous estimate. And there's obviously the question with this massive change in the global economy, whether the benefits of that will be shared or they'll be unequal. There'll be a divide in this new AI world. What's your own judgment, first about the extent of the economic change and growth opportunities, and second, the danger of unequal distribution?
Yeah, I think both questions are important. I mean, I think I've seen that study, and I've actually seen many others. In fact, there's some with even bigger numbers than that in terms of contributions to the global economy. But through everything that I see and we're working on with the technology, I would say, yes, the potential is enormous. Because keep in mind that one of the unique things about this technology, we haven't had very many like this, is it's a general purpose technology, and there's a very specific economic definition of what that means, just give it its broad applicability, and also the idea of its knock-on potential to induce knock-on other investments and the ability to continually improve. So it's one of those rare general purpose technology. It's also got another feature which is perhaps unique to AI, even more than the other previous technologies, which is economists often call these IMIs. It's an invention for inventing. I think when you look at those two possibilities, and you start to see how that could play out across the economy, businesses, large and small sectors, whole economies driving productivity, you kind of see your way through those large numbers. At the same time, I think it's important to note, and we certainly believe that we don't think any of those gains are automatic. They're not going to happen on autopilot. And I think it's going to take a few specific things happening. I think it's going to take adoption. We talked about adoption. It's going to take the transformation of processes and organizations to take advantage of that. It's going to take applying that technology to productivity-enhancing use cases. And it's going to take these other complementary investments in the economy. So none of this is automatic, even though the numbers look big and large. But to come to your other question, which is about what this might mean for, equity and whether everybody will benefit from this, I think this is one of the things we're all going to need to focus on, because there's nothing that's by itself that implies that just because we capture or realize any of this economic bounty, it'll be broadly available to everybody. And that's what we're going to need to make to put some effort into. And I think this is both true thinking about different countries, but also within countries. If there's one thing that COVID, I think, showed us was how even in the US, there was uneven access to infrastructure, access to technology, even within an advanced economy like the US. So we have to work our way through that. Then you've got the same issue between countries. One of the things we've been thinking a lot about, and I was here last year at the UN General Assembly. You may know this, David. I was co-chairing the UN's high-level body on AI, looking at this globally. And the worry, of course, was what you just said, which is we don't want the current digital divide to turn into the AI divide. So when you look at countries, say, in the global south, what needs to happen? A lot of infrastructure investments, access to the components that are necessary for this technology, whether it's compute or access to models, a lot of infrastructure investments like connectivity, skills, training, and even education. So we're trying to do our part as Google. In fact, just last week, one of the announcements I made was the investments we're making in Africa. So we made a $1 billion investment commitment to build infrastructure in Africa. We already exceeded that, because we made that commitment back in 2019, building connectivity cables all the way down the entire western seaboard of Africa, connecting Central Africa to Southern Africa. So we're doing a lot of those investments. I also announced that we've made our leading model, Gemini, the app, freely available to students in 8 African countries that make up a population of 500 million, so that students who are in school get access to this technology. So I think it's going to take those kinds of investments to make sure people can access the technology and fully participate.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask you as the next question about the UN Advisory Board that you served on. So one of the things that we know about new technologies is that they often lead to overinvestment and bubbles. Railroads in Britain in the 19th century are a classic example. Electric lighting, when it first was introduced, led to wild speculative investment that crashed. The investment intensity now surrounding AI is overwhelming. As you look at the industry, just speak about the danger of a bubble developing, whether there's just too much money chasing a limited set of opportunities now in a way that's going to lead to something quite disruptive.
Well, I think what you're seeing with a lot of the investments, including from us, a lot of that is in infrastructure, compute clusters, and all of that. And I think, in our case, we see the demand for all of that. And I think the question is, you would expect that at some point that's going to turn into realized value for the people making the investments, for us. I think in our case, those investments are enabling us to do a whole range of things. So sure, we've got Gemini models and the Gemini chatbot, if you like, but it's also helping us make search even better. We like to think that search is still Google's moonshot in many respects. And I say that because the way people search keeps evolving. There was a time when we all had to type the search query very precisely. Now people search with pictures. You just point your camera at something. So the way people are going to search, so we're seeing that turning, continue to transform our core business. But think about all the things we're doing in our cloud business. And if you live in San Francisco like I do, half the paid rides in San Francisco are Waymos, which are our cars, our autonomous cars. So for us, we see this paying off in multiple different kinds of investments and businesses where we're investing. I think that's a question people should ask themselves, which is, in what way will those investments turn into realized value? We see that as a way to deliver for our customers, for our users, and quite frankly, do some extraordinary things like Waymo and advanced science.
So you don't really see an AI bubble building that would be dangerous?
Yeah, I think, we'll see how it plays out for each player in that space, right? I'm describing the kinds of places where we see, us being able to deliver on products and services that people like and seem to use a lot. If I look at, for example, at Google, we now have lots of products used by more than billions of people. And I think those products are doing well and they're growing and we're delivering on them. I think it's important to be able to see avenues to transform that into products that delight and excite users, and hopefully will have a reasonable return for us. So we're excited about all of that.
One thing about AI is that there is an inescapable global competition going on. Fundamentally, it's seen as between the United States and China. Google has DeepMind, China has DeepSeek, and DeepSeek turns out to be pretty good given all the limitations that people thought had been placed on China. I want to ask you to assess, from your perspective at Google, but just as a technologist, where China and the US are in this AI race. It's often said by knowledgeable people that the United States is still 6 months, sort of mythical 6 months ahead. But that China is demonstrating, as with DeepSeek, capabilities that are, in some ways, are surprising. What's your own assessment?
Yeah, I think one of the things that the DeepSeek showed us is that perhaps China wasn't as far behind as perhaps people might have thought. But I have an extraordinary, enormous confidence. Keep in mind that this technology, DeepSeek is still a text-only model, and so these models have become natively multimodal. They're doing lots of things. They're now powering robotics. So the breadth of what we're doing with this technology gives me incredible confidence. Keep in mind, for us, we're lucky to have extraordinary teams in Google Research, Google DeepMind, investing in a wide range of aspects of this technology. For example, one of the big highlights last year was breakthrough progress in our quantum AI team. Right? So if you look at the breadth of what we're doing, it gives us confidence. But at the same time, I don't think the US or any of our companies should rest on our laurels. I think this is going to be an intense competition. We're going to need to keep investing. And I think it's great to see at least the pendulum perhaps swing back a little bit to encouraging more investment and more innovation to move ahead. So I think all of that, hopefully bodes well. I hope we stay and continue to invest because, at some level, others are investing too. China's clearly investing in what they're trying to do. But I think we have to keep investing in what we're doing.
For a last question, I want to turn to ones that we gathered from young people before this program. And this is from a woman named Jennifer Hicks in Massachusetts. And she asks, recent college graduates have only had a few years of AI exposure and they're struggling to find jobs. How can AI help them adapt their skills to jobs that are in demand?
I think that's an important question from Jennifer. I'd say a few different things. I think one of the things that a few studies have actually now shown is how these technologies can often help and assist early employees, less skilled workers, to actually be able to do things that they couldn't otherwise do and learn from them. I think I'd encourage Jennifer and others to look to using these technologies. I'd also look to use these tools to actually think about their jobs. One of the tools we've developed is something called Career Dreamer, which allows mostly younger people to think about what skills are in demand, how can they match the experiences that they have to the things that they're doing. And we're also running these AI Essentials training courses for students. But I think it's important there's been a little bit of conflation of things about what's happening to people entering the labor markets. I think if you see some of the studies that have shown a slowdown in hiring, there's something that doesn't quite make sense to me, at least, about the timing of all of that. If you look at some of those studies, the downturn happened sometime in the spring of 2022, and you say, okay, so if it was in the spring of 2022 when the hiring slowed down. Well, that seems to be too much dead on time because the so-called ChatGPT moment happened in October. So, so that suggests to me that maybe other things were already going on in the labor markets. Because keep in mind that in many companies, there'd been a lot of overhiring that had happened, certainly the case in the tech industry, in COVID. And a lot of our companies, including ours, had to work our way through a lot of what I call the COVID era hiring. And a lot of that actually started to happen in 2021 and 2022. So I don't think I would equate what we're seeing in the labor markets as being entirely about AI. But it's important for us to invest in young people, give them access to these tools to help them in their careers.
That's super helpful. Jennifer, if you're watching, getting job advice from Google is pretty good. So stay right here. We have a final coming discussion in more detail about the U.S.-China competition. Right now, just join me in thanking James. What a treat to have you here talking about Google.